Well, let's get started then. Hello and welcome to the 28th Annual Hopes Conference. My name is Kelly and I am the director this year. On behalf of my team, we are excited to see everyone back in person as well as virtually. I want to begin by thanking my directors, Armando, Maddie, Ankita, Kari, Tamia, and Nick for all of your hard work. Thank you to Michael Zaretsky and Sandy McConnell for your support and guidance. And thank you to all the students and faculty that have volunteered their time to help make today happen. Let's give a round of applause. This evening, we will hear from our dean, Adrian Parr, and listen to a performance by Alex Braidwood. Tomorrow, we will have a QR code where people can scan to submit questions to be asked to the panels and speakers. And then we will end today with appetizers in the Hayden Gallery. Tomorrow will be a full day of individual and panel talks. Coffee and pastries will be available at 9:30 in the morning, and we will have lunch catered. Sunday will consist of a workshop at the Urban Farm, and I was told to meet near the clubhouse with the red table. And currently we are in the process of recruiting a team for next year. So if you are a current student who is interested in being involved, please find me or one of my team members. You can find us wearing the name tags during the breaks. To give you a brief history of the conference, HOPE stands for Holistic Options for Planet Earth Sustainability. It was established in 1994 and has been led by an interdisciplinary group of students each year that are eager to direct their design education. This conference is a fully student-run and student-led event. Each year, HOPES provides a platform for students, professionals, leaders, and activists to engage in discussions on sustainable solutions to contemporary issues. Beyond Us is the title of this year's conference, which explores the concept of trans-species design. This is a non-human-centered approach to regenerating, restoring, and replenishing the natural environment. Rather than designing for only human needs, this approach seeks to find solutions that benefit both native species and humans. Our diverse mix of speakers came from around the world and is excited to share their work related to this theme. Before we begin with our first speaker, Tamia will give you a brief overview of the Kalapuya tribe.
Hello, everyone. So my name's Tamia. Before we begin the Ecological Design Center's annual Hopes Conference, I would like to take a few minutes to speak about the Kalapuya territory. So the University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya people. I was able to conduct some research into their history with the help of Katie Staton, the steward of the Many Nations Longhouse. The estimated Kalapuya population at its largest was around 15,000, but by the mid-1800s, through induced diseases like malaria and pneumonia, that number was reduced to just 600. A tremendous amount of knowledge and culture was lost along with the victims of these epidemics. In 1848, Oregon became a territory of the United States. In 1855, the government made a treaty with the Kalapuya. The Siletz and Grand Ronde reservations were formed to house the Coast, Willamette, and Umpqua tribes. However, sites for reservations were chosen because the land was marginal or because it was deemed unsuitable for the new influx of settlers. The relocation of the tribes into one or two areas left the native people without shelters, food, or supplies. It's remarkable that we still have knowledge of some of the essential aspects of the Kalapuya history, given the decimation of their population and the near extinguishment of their culture through decades of social, political, and economic oppression. What's interesting about Native communities is that they are often regarded as part of the past, and it's left at that. However, the purpose of this land acknowledgement is to bring to our attention the need to center tribal voices. Indigenous voices are still here. We just need to provide a platform so that they can be heard. The first important step is to recognize publicly that no matter where you might be in the U.S., you are on what was once indigenous land. We should also acknowledge that this land was almost certainly taken from its traditional inhabitants by force, and that their descendants are still here. May this serve as a necessary reminder of the uncomfortable truth that must be realized should we hope to move forward. Today, the Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, who continue to make important contributions to their communities at University of Oregon and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. The University of Oregon has made several efforts, including the recent funding of the Oregon Tribal Grant, which seeks to offset college-related expenses like tuition, housing, books, and costs not covered by other grants. Despite these efforts, there are many reparations still to be made in the future. We express our respect for all the federally recognized tribal nations of Oregon. We also express our respect for all the other displaced indigenous peoples who call Oregon home. If you're interested in learning more, there are 2 books at the back table. that have been nicely provided by the Many Nations Longhouse. I can provide some more information based on what I've learned, but I would encourage you to conduct your own research and pay a visit to the Many Nations Longhouse here on campus. Thank you.
Thank you for that acknowledgement. I would now like to welcome our first speaker of the evening, Adrian Parr. So Adrian Parr is an internationally recognized environmental, political, cultural thinker and advocate, author, and filmmaker. She is the Dean of College of Design at University of Oregon, as well as a senior fellow at the Design Futures Council. Prior to joining UO, she served as the Dean of the College of Architecture, Planning, and Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Arlington, and as the director of the Taft Research Center at the University of Cincinnati. Adrian is a transdisciplinary scholar working at the intersection of architecture criticism, aesthetics, political theory, and environmental studies. She's authored 8 books, the latest of 3 which focused on environmental politics and sustainability culture. And she has served as UNESCO's water chair for 8 years. The driving force behind her work is the question of how to overcome ecological and economic scarcity. She asserts that environmental devastation and climate change are crimes against humanity. And her 2016 documentary, The Intimate Realities on Water, won more than a dozen awards, including Best Documentary of the 2016 United International Independent Film Festival. Adrian is currently the curator of an exhibit for the European Cultural Center's Biennale Architecture exhibition in Venice, opening in May. Thank you, Adrian.
Can you hear me now? Yep, great. Thanks so much, Kelly. I really appreciate that warm welcome, and thank you for inviting me to speak. And thank you for all your hard work and the other students that have been part of the working group for making the Hopes Conference a reality this year, because I know last year we had to cancel it, so I'm really excited that we were able to all get together this year. And thank you for that very meaningful land acknowledgement. All right, so I was asked to speak on my recent publication, Earthlings, and more specifically on transspecies design. And I knew I could easily deliver a theoretical presentation to you, and that would involve me logically walking you through my book publications and the philosophical frameworks that I've often lent on, and these, you know, whether we're beginning with some of the edited compilations that I've worked on with others, or whether, you know, we're looking at some of the earlier work when I was looking at the idea of difference and repetition in artistic practices, which then led into the book on memorial culture, where I started getting more interested in the relationship between trauma, memory, and landscape as it infused the built environment. Then on to the trilogy, where I was looking at sustainability, culture, environmental politics, and more specifically, you know, how to put to work an environmental imagination in order to bring about change. And it's interesting as I sort of look back at all of that work, what it lays bare and how I got to Earthlings, which is a very different kind of book. And where in Earthlings I advanced a theoretical idea of trans-environmentalism being structured by 3 conceptual pillars, one being transgenerational, one being transnational, and the other being transspeciesist. And it's the transspecies arm that informs my more recent thinking on transspecies design, and which served as a curatorial concept for this year's Venice Architecture Biennale. So put simply, transspecies design is a call out to the design community to move beyond the dominant anthropocentric paradigm that situates the species Homo sapien as the primary point of reference of how design value is ascertained, produced, and articulated. Indeed, such an approach is a speciesist argument. And the anthropocentric frame, that's the dominant design frame, when I'm calling that speciesist, I'm leaning on the philosopher Peter Singer, who argued that speciesism is a form of prejudice or an attitude of bias in favour of the interests of a member of one's own species and against the members of other species. So transspecies design, as I outline it in my forthcoming book in collaboration with Michael Zaretsky and Liska Chan, it's an anthology that Routledge is producing, attends to how species interact and the relationships of mutual enrichment central to a thriving species system. So there are three fundamental principles that drive species design in the way that I've articulated it, and the first one is regenerative, by creating a built environment that adds ecological value and spurs on biodiverse flourishing. Practices that engage, for example, in reverse engineering, like Michael van Valkenburg's design of the Harold Simmons Park in Dallas. That's basically a system of rewilding the Trinity River. And here's an example of that project here. Then we've also got restorative kinds of practices that take a biome-in approach, restoring ecosystems, especially across terrestrial biomes. And here Terraform One has created a monarch butterfly habitat as the facade of a building in New York. And then the idea of reconciliation, taken from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission work in Canada, which was trying to seek ways in which we can repair the past harms of colonialism inflicted against the Indigenous populations, picking up on some of the ways in which they articulated that and transferring it over into an ecological context to think about, like, how might reconciliation work between human-built environments and all the other species and the habitats that they depend upon for their flourishing. And so therefore I'm sort of thinking about ways in which architecture and the built environment might engage in systems of mutual flourishing. But the question is, for me now, at this sort of point in my career, you know, I'm turning 56 this year, and I've spent decades writing theoretical books, and that's the thing that I present often out to the public. But there's a whole other body of work that makes up me and that infuses the ways in which I think about theory, practice, and the material world, and the energies and the forces that combine to produce life on Earth. And the background to that theory is, you know, trying to sort of understand the intimate connections and ways of thinking and the murkier and stickier spaces and times of creative production that inform my thinking. So I'm thinking here of, and I'm going to just sort of play some of this, and these are some of the little kinds of movies that I make in the background as I'm thinking about, as I'm sort of writing books, as I'm making other sorts of movies that are very much about storytelling. And I'm interested here in the materiality of effective combinations, the ways in which affection and deep feeling combine with reason and abstraction, and also with figuration. And that together these intimate moments of discovery and exploration go on to then infuse the ways in which I organise these feelings and emotions and thoughts and sort of structure them. I put them into a different structure that then produces the theory out of which, you know, we have the various publications that I pointed to at the beginning of this talk. And one example of the ways in which these sorts of feelings and affects and scientific thinking begin to combine was in this movie Watershed Urbanism that was shown as part of the Space-Time Existence exhibit in conjunction with the 2021 Venice Architecture Biennale. So working across a variety of mediums in this way, I would very much describe the process that I work with as a creative ontology that's infused with a self-reflexive imagination and iterative criticality. And when I was finishing up the Watershed Urbanism, the making of that particular film, I was also starting to mentally go into the space ready to write Earthlings. And I was just sort of noticing today as I was putting this together, I mean, I wrote Earthlings in this sort of suspended temporality of COVID amidst that spatial tension that realised both the sort of smooth spaces of viral transmission and the striated spaces of social discipline. And I looked at this image today and I suddenly realised that, you know, when I created the cover, I had, you know, the eyes of different species and including even the sort of the nut eye hole of a tree. But it was very much, I think, influenced by the fact that I'd been seeing everyone walking around like this for months on end, right? You know, as COVID had hit. It's funny how these things sort of trickle over in that way. But Earthlings, unlike a lot of the other books that I've written, and I would say that, you know, over the corpus of my work, the writing has loosened up over time, right? You do your PhD and you've got to be kind of rigidly in scholarship. And my master's thesis combined drawings and poetry and philosophy as well as storytelling. So I discovered that, you know, over time you can become full professor and you can start to sort of be yourself and do what you want. And I kind of returned to that sort of space of my master's space and produced a book that was a blend of storytelling, poetry, myth, infused with science. I read stacks of scientific articles to make sure that as I entered into the bodies of other species, which is really, you know, the beginning and the end point of each chapter, that I did so in a responsible way, that really knew about the science of each individual species and the environmental and ecological constraints which they were living within in the contemporary world as a result of climate change and environmental degradation. So in the first chapter, Land, in Earthlings, I begin by entering the body of a great sequoia tree. And I'm just going to read briefly a snippet from the beginning of that chapter to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Its 200 long foot body bent in the breeze, offering itself up to the moist fog and darkened skies. A cone loosely attached to one of its dry, awl-shaped leaves fell quite suddenly, surprising the mule doe and her fawn below. The fallen cone released its frost-tolerant seedlings into the earth, eager for sunlight to return. Members of the group, fellow great sequoias, located 2 miles away, briefly hesitated, then rocked back and forth with the wind as it declared itself. Birds and lodepole chipmunks anxiously scratched their way around the tree's brittle limbs, seeking refuge from the storm. The slow breath and soft body heat of a spotted owl snuggled inside its trunk warmed the gaping hollow near its base. Underneath, its roots stretched out across the land, its xylem tissue soaking up minerals and water, transporting these throughout its parched woody tissue up into its foliage. The rain brought welcome relief from a prolonged period of drought. The dense forest vegetation had been thirsty for years, and when the snowpack higher up the mountain decreased, the rushing streams transporting nutrients slowed to a trickle as their average water temperature rose. The cold-blooded salmonoids, who flourish in cooler conditions, had become stressed. They moved constantly from one part of the stream to another, desperately trying to thermally regulate their bodies. And when the cold water refuges disappeared, stream flows changed and higher water temperatures normalised. Fish started to lose their temperature cues to locate food and avoid predators. At a higher, more remote location of the forest, another fish, not native to the mountain lakes, was wreaking havoc on the mountain yellow-legged frog population, greedily consuming tadpoles. The tadpole-eating trout, combined with a few new frog-killing fungus and pesticides blowing in from the valley below, decimated this once thriving amphibian population. Here, in the wild, the wind and the water benefit some and are a burden for others. The rains had failed to come. year after year. What little water remained in the trees' leaves had evaporated. Then, after the soil moisture declined, photosynthetic activity dwindled, and under these arid conditions, the tree's growth stunted. Overwhelmed by water stress, its body no longer reproduced, and the previously collaborative root systems of the forest, now exhausted, had begun turning on each other. Where previously the trees had cared for and supported weaker members of the community through a vast underground social network, now in thirsty desperation, they robbed each other of a vital water resource. The tree sensed a throbbing loss, an echo pulsating deep down throughout its collective root system. It was one of the luckier ones. It had mustered up enough water reserves to produce a resin that could submerge and kill the beetles in its sticky red substance. It became one of the rare ones to survive extreme heat, water scarcity, infestation, and more. Its not-so-hardy friends had long perished, yet the flammability of the resin-infused bark was both a blessing and a curse. For in addition to fighting off the predatory beetle, it would fuel the wildfires. The heat had taken its toll on forest life. Ground moisture was overdrawn. The lush green canopy turned brown from chronic thirst. And when water evaporated from the leaves, the trees were forced to draw down even further in search of water, draining moisture from the soil at a faster rate than what the rains could replenish. Millions and millions of these stoic sequoias died off when the deep soil water vanished and insect contagion befell them. A loss of this magnitude had taken its toll on the once flourishing arboreal ecosystem. Many tree ancestors perished, some over 3,000 years old. This community of biotic and abiotic earthlings, trees, leaves, bushes, grasses, mammals, birds, amphibians, fishes, anthropoda, reptiles, microorganisms, water, wind, sunlight, and more, are different but related. And the ecological value of this community far surpasses any kind of measurable economic value people may attempt to place on it. The intriguing and limitless cycles of ingenuity, sustenance, and death through the mixture of chemical compounds, gases, energy, matter, bodies, excretions, and flows make up the productive and reproductive forces driving all life on Earth. James Lovelock calls this super self-regulating organism Gaia. The fundamental lesson of Gaia is that Earth is a system out of which no living being can feasibly extract itself, a fact too eagerly and often dismissed by zealous reasoning and technological hubris. Gaia flies directly in the face of human exceptionalism. We humans do not inhabit the Earth as discrete entities. Life, and by extension the Earth, does not succumb to human will. Indeed, humans are the effect of a complex system of temporal and material enfolding. Big Bang atoms of hydrogen, stardust atoms of carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, then genes that have travelled across time to blend with molecules, cells, chemical elements, and gases that are structured into organs, bones, hair, nails, and skin, as well as nervous, lymphatic, and renal systems. All these elements clash and connect to form an atonal music of sorts, regulating body temperature, expelling waste, and moving oxygen around. It would be remiss to assume that Gaia exists in a state of harmony. Our bodies, like the terrain on which we live and the biospheres in which we are implicated, are riddled with struggling bacteria, mites, fungi, viruses, and protozoa battling out their existence. Our bodies provide a rich habitat for a multitude of parasitic microbiota living on and in our bodies. More than 99% of the octillions of atoms making up our bodies are in fact largely empty. From here, in the book, I pass into the body of a mosquito infecting the body of an Amazon forest labourer, whose spirit body enters the celestial spheres and eventually reappears in the body of a monarch butterfly about to enter hibernation in Mexico. Then back up into the skies, into the tiny body of an Arctic tern I move, who annually migrates from the South Pole to the North for breeding season before travelling back to the Antarctic in an S-shaped pattern across the globe once more. The bird has the longest migration path of any bird in the world, with some flying nearly 50,000 miles a year, which when calculated over the course of its lifetime equates to approximately 3 trips to the moon and back again. Moving along, I plunge the reader into the fluid oceanic space covering 70% of the Earth's surface, a space that is in a continual state of circulation, moving clockwise in the north and counterclockwise in the south, a total of 352 quintillion gallons of water continually in motion, massaging, spinning, bouncing and swinging over some 140 million square miles. There, in the ocean, I bring the reader into the slowly bleaching coral reefs and the intriguing research around acoustic enrichment that can assist with reef recovery. For science shows that reef recovery not only depends upon water temperature stabilising over an extended period of time, it also needs a flourishing marine ecosystem filled with diverse fish species, herbivores, detrivores, planktivores and predatory piscivores. This enriching amalgamation of marine life has a sound, and playing the sounds of healthy marine habitat doubles the number and variety of fish species returning to a reef and can produce a positive stimulation for distressed coral. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia are the traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef, and for them the marine environment, just as much as terrestrial environments, are filled with creation stories of ancestral spirits from the dream time, of a creator enraged by an insubordinate human who spewed lava and rock and that later formed the reef. In Earthlings, the many legends and myths that infiltrate how we as a species experience and understand the world sit alongside the research findings of scientists and social scientists, such as Bora, the kangaroo, who according to the Kulila tribe of Indigenous Australians once travelled on all four legs until he came upon a group of marked figures dancing round and around a firelit circle. Watching the men dance, the roo felt an eagerness to join them, and so he lifted his body up onto his back legs, balancing himself with his tail, and jumped. He jumped into the ring with the men conducting secret men's business. When the men saw the roo, the old tribal Wirrinorn told Bora that because he had witnessed the secret rites of the corroboree without being invited, he must be punished. But rather than kill the roo, Bora and his tribe would be forever cursed to move around on their hind legs. And to this day, the kangaroo moves across the land in this way. Storytelling. It's an important ingredient in how we come to know ourselves, our place in the world, and the world in us. And it permeates my theoretical thinking as much as it does the books and poetry I write and the movies and paintings I make, all of which animate my life. attending to the effective moments of different organisms and ecological forces as these energetically combine into systems of mutual stimulation. I engage the multiple layers of historical violence that hierarchically organize and unevenly distribute a whole gamut of social relations that make up life on Earth. Whether this is between people of different backgrounds and levels of opportunity, all the way through to human and other than human species relations. So for example, in that film, the idea is like one durational shot, right? And the viewer is forced to sort of focus on one thing, which is the chief's head at a certain point becomes clear. But a lot happens in that one durational shot until eventually, you move through these three stories. You've got the ecological vitality of the blue sky, and I researched all the species that live off that rock and then went to the libraries and got the sounds of those species, and Nick and I together made the soundscape that produced that. But the idea is that the rock is that point that the viewer's focusing on. Meanwhile, all this change is happening. And it's a sort of a Bergsonian idea of creative production, that time is not linear, that time is actually inherently creative, and that it's all about an eternal return to something, right? And that as you return to the past and you remember the past, you never remember it the same way again, which is not to say that what you remember doesn't have any truth value, that it's that the temporal return in and of itself is a creative undertaking. And so having just one shot like that and forcing the viewer to sit with it and to experience a durational moment, right, that produces creative change is one that also then, is picked up in a lot of my theoretical musings as well, right? It's the way in which I think about relations between different organisms and bodies and forces and energies. So whether this is people of different backgrounds and levels of opportunity, all the way through to human and other human species, I'm leaning on the remarkable community here of feminist new materialist scholars who've been my colleagues and my friends since I was in graduate school and beyond, such as the tentacular thinking of Donna Haraway and her call to de-center human exceptionalism and bounded individualism, and Rosie Braidotti's work on relationality in a post-humanist context. And I arrive in Earthlings at the conclusion that one of our greatest challenges is to recognize that all life on Earth is ecological, which means that reciprocity, not outdated notions of identity and individuality, must become the driving force of politics and social life. We witness bitter poverty and persecution driving people into the waves. Their thirsty bodies flood another's shoreline, a shoreline to be shared which no one dares, a new life intercepted and turned away, and their darkness is panic. We witness waters monstrous and thick, ironclad bodies navigate the riptides filled with viciously good intentions, not upset, without regret, all hoping to protect a national story from foreign spaces of emptiness, and their darkness is ferocious. Imagine a people neither blindfolded nor kidnapped by fundamentalists, opportunists, terrorists, or capitalists, standing in defiance amidst the dust and debris of hate speech and gangsters outlawed by compromises made in other lands, and the darkness falls silent. Imagine the stature of a species never hunted, looking its killer straight in the eyes, or a warrior dragging the secrets of war through the trapdoor and the darkness it's booming. Imagine another world of wind, waves, and sun energizing a planet once in waiting, announcing tomorrow has come. Another world impenetrably open, struck by tomorrow's reach, it throws out a mischievous wink, linking arms in deep friendship. Like a young girl's dreams released inside a woman's body, tomorrow finds its way past overcast skies and mobster lies. Filled with laughter, that kind that saturates a world with the sweet sounds of sisterhood and fireflies, it swaps the forsaken futures of yesterday, oh dear, and it ended off there, from which a new earth is born. Thank you very much. I had a bit of an ad hoc situation occur. The wrong notes got printed, so I had to kind of ad-lib as I went along, but hopefully it all came together well.
It was wonderful.
That's good. Any questions?
Hi, I'm going to be helping Adrian take questions. So if you have any questions, raise your hand. I'll come over and hand you the mic. I'll let you gather your thoughts.
So in the videos that you showed, very lovely by the way, I love the music, it was very beautifully done. I noticed you were talking about like trans species and you even had like humans on your list, but I noticed in your videos there was no human interaction with the nature. Was that a deliberate choice, or were you focusing on the environment, or do you think that like having how humans interact with the environment would enhance the piece?
That's a wonderful question. So in the first one that I showed, Watershed Urbanism, there is one scene where you've got a person that's walking their dog, right? And it sort of sits in the middle of that video. And that's very consciously sitting in the middle of that video because it's about this sort of disciplined relationship between an other than human species, right? But the rest of them, I like them all to just appear on their own terms. But the interaction with the human in that particular film is very much through the built environment. And so what we're experiencing there is a sort of collage of all the sort of wildlife that exists but is actually sort of rendered invisible and inaudible a lot of the time through the sounds of traffic. And that film was taken while I was living in Dallas, right? So, and I was focusing a lot on this other exhibit I was doing called Watershed Urbanism, which actually led into the thinking for the Trans-Species Design exhibition, right? So I see that there is a human interaction there, but it's more in abstracted form, right? And then with the Tale of Three Rocks, which was done here in Oregon, it is very much meant to just focus on the sort of the ecological flourishing of that rock. However, the human element is coming in through the stories that we tell about the rock. Like I was really intrigued when I visited that area and, you know, I'd looked out the window and I said, God, that looks like one of Monet's haystacks, right? As the sun was beginning to change and set. And then I found out from the local community that they call it the haystack. And then after that, I found out there's this whole other, indigenous history to the rock, and that it's Chief Kiawanda's face. So once again, the relationship between other than human species and the human is done through storytelling, but also through abstraction, because it's the face of Chief Kiawanda that you're actually looking at for a majority of that film, right? So I do see that the connection is there. But I didn't want it to be a literal connection. I wanted them to be more sort of poetic connections that the viewer had to kind of tease out for themselves. Thank you.
Great question. Any other questions from the crowd? Yes.
Joyce.
Thank you, Madison. Thank you. Hello? Oh. Thank you, Adrian, for that wonderful lecture. And I really love how your work over your lifetime is straddling between the kind of theoretical and scholarly, and then now kind of moving into the sort of artistic, poetic realm. And I was actually really struck. There was this one kind of small moment in your presentation where you said something like, I became full professor and then I got to do what I wanted to do. And I'm wondering if, I guess, like, you know, how, because I think, you know.
My constituency, but anyway.
But I think it's a really interesting thing, because I feel like nowadays with, you know, young faculty kind of going up for tenure and so on, there's a lot of interest in, you know, how to approach climate justice questions through, not through just, you know, the sort of grants and sort of hard sciences and hard sciences world, but also how to kind of move through the kind of artistic kind of community engagement world. So I'm wondering, if you could reflect on that for young scholars now.
So I'll share with you a little anecdote. When I was studying for my PhD, and Claire Colebrook was my mentor, and she's now at Penn. I think she's at Penn State, big sort of Deleuzian scholar and feminist new materialist. And she left after about a year and a half. Went to Edinburgh, had a wonderful fellowship, and I got sort of shunted around the department. And nobody really knew what to do with me, right? Because the philosophy department, which is where Peter Singer came out of, at Monash University, very highly regarded department, but strong kind of analytic philosophy. So for those of you that are not aware of the distinction between analytic and continental philosophy, I am a continental philosopher. Analytic philosophy is, premises, conclusions, carry that conclusion forward to here. And so that sort of logical thinking is useful, but I found it incredibly restrictive, right? And it certainly did not capture what I was trying to do in my thesis, which was looking at Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, and looking at the way in which he moved across science, drawing, painting, studies in optics, engineering, and I was interested in developing a concept of creative production. And I got up at the first Women in Philosophy conference, and international conference, and the person that had started supervising me was in the audience, and she'd been saying to me, "No, you can't really write a thesis like this, Adrian." And I got up, and I remember starting to talk about Leonardo's drawings through this sort of lens of difference and repetition, right? That difference is a form of creative production. If repetition is a form of creative production, if it's not mimetic, right? If it's not just sort of stuck within mimesis, and that it allows difference to be produced as it repeats, right? And I said, artists, for example, and we started sort of talking about the restrictions of grammar and of language, and McCann has talked about this a lot in psychoanalysis, that we insert ourselves into an ordered structure by the way in which we speak through a system of grammar, right? And it kind of cuts out the creative, and that's why poetry is very interesting. Anyhow, the point being, I got up and I thought I had made a benign comment, which was, the bigger point was about difference and repetition. But what I said was, like artists, for example, don't necessarily think in language, right? And I continued on. Well, the audience got irate about this, right? And I didn't really get through my talk because they all attacked me and said, that's impossible. You can't think outside of language, right? Which is the conundrum of a logician and an analytical philosopher, right? And someone who grew up with the arts, my father's a performance artist, my aunt is a well-known contemporary artist working in installation and photography. This was sort of normal to me, that you can think outside of language, that there are other languages or other ways of expressing that are a form of thinking, right? And I think, to get the PhD done, I realized really quickly that side of me was going to be squashed out, right? And the transdisciplinary thinker that I am, who does think across different languages, and I had done that in my master's degree with a very different supervisor who was totally fine with it, was something over time that increasingly got more and more disciplined. As you entered into the academy and, you're an assistant professor and you've got to produce a certain amount, and you've got to, go through a peer review process where a lot of folks are still sort of thinking in very specialised disciplinary ways. And how do you find a niche for yourself without losing who you are and to keep your voice within all of that, right? So, the work that I started doing with UNESCO then was such a relief, because I could find this other outlet where I was making documentary movies, and I was getting more involved with culturally appropriate design solutions, but out there in the field, interviewing people, and beginning to kind of create this other sort of creative practice that was informing the books that I was writing. And then, at a certain point, you go, I can do what I want in the way that I want to do it, and I want to do all these things because they're all informing one another. And the interesting thing is, I'm talking to you about it now, I'm sort of realizing it goes all the way back to Leonardo's notebooks. Because in his notebooks, this is what he was doing. He was jumping into all kinds of things, and he was also writing incredible sort of philosophical observations along the way that were incredibly enlightening, right? Not to mention that he wrote back to front and inside out, so you have to read it with a mirror, right? But that in itself is a sort of a creative way of articulating the way you are in the world, right? Some might call that paranoia, but I find that very intriguing, right? So anyhow, yeah, you're right. And then you get to a certain point, you know, I'm in my mid-50s now. It's like, I'm just going to do what I want to do, yeah? And be honest about all the other stuff that's been going on in the background that's enabled me to do that, yeah. And I think now, with this generation, there's much more sensitivity and sympathy for people that are working across the disciplines. That was not the case when I was coming through academia, straight out of, you know, PhD. You had to really toe the line and become incredibly specialised, yeah.
More great questions and great answers. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question from the crowd. So raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk, Adrian. I was wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit about how you think about collaboration in your work. I was going to ask specifically in your creative practice, but I guess in your work just generally.
Yeah. So some things are very solitary, like the writing of Earthlings was an incredibly solitary undertaking, and I needed that lonely, it wasn't solitude, it was a sort of lonely space in order for all of those other beings to come into being, right? And I did go into a lot of different beings and have to research them. The films is probably the area where, you know, the most collaboration occurs. And I think, you know, that's both a technical thing, but it's also, with the films, you know, you're bouncing ideas and aesthetic sensibilities off and in collaboration with others in order to make the films. And then the space of sort of drawing and painting, that tends to be incredibly private. Yeah, so if there's someone in the house, I can't paint, like, kind of thing, right? We had visitors last weekend, and I'm like, I can't go anywhere near, like, the canvas while there are visitors around. It kind of disrupts things. The UNESCO work, all about collaboration. Yep, can't get anything done if you're not collaborating. That said, I will also say that, you know, beyond collaborating with other human beings, I think, you know, the writings, the theory is a collaboration inevitably with other species. So whilst I say that the writing of Earthlings, for example, was an incredibly lonely undertaking and it needed that strange space, it was one where I was collaborating all the time with other species in my imagination because I was having to live these other bodies. And I was researching everything about the science around that body, right? And so those bodies were, you know, the sequoia tree, the mosquito, the monarch butterfly, and the body, you know, going all the way across the United States and all the way back down into hibernation again. You know, other kinds of human bodies, and the bodies of a polar bear. I combined memories of field work up in the Arctic with the Inupiaq in one chapter where I created hybrid characters because I didn't want to sort of steal somebody else's story. So I combined a mishmash of stories and then created a body there. And that meant sort of being part of that person's reality in order for that story to actually come forth. So there's a whole variety of different species, and then the bird as well, right, that I was living in for long periods of time. And I also see that as a form of collaboration, yeah, albeit an excessively imaginative one, yeah.
Thank you for all your great questions. Can we have another round of applause for Adrian?
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the questions.